Oh shit!
Oh my god, it makes the noise and everything.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's proper good. Can you hear it?
I love it. I absolutely love it. I tried to get Hannah to let me buy one when I went to Hollywood Studios.
Yes, this is the inner child in me, but what?
She wouldn't let me. $232 it was.
Well,
Aluminium
let's
and
just put it like
everything.
this. This is a lot more expensive. I can promise you that. But it's really loud.
I love it.
See?
Although my inner side, I'd like I want the red one.
Yeah, my mate's got a red one. I'm going to get a multicolour one eventually, but yeah. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another E5 podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Meenan, and my co-host is again
Ryan Dempsey.
Mr. Dempsey. We did a podcast on EICRs, periodic inspections, reminiscing about when we were on the tools. We were, and spoke about test kits and just put the world to rights on it. But I think we need to take it up a level, because obviously we've got a lot of knowledge now from the opposite side of the coin, and I think we should share it. And in this podcast, I think that's what we'll do. So this podcast is EICRs, but from a client, end user, sort of maybe a senior inspector type role. Could we say that?
Just hang on 1 minute, Paul. You are trying to tell me that we used to be on the tools?
I think we did. Yes, apparently, yes. Yes, we did.
And then you're trying to say we then left the tools and became a client.
Yeah. Now, what you're trying, then this is where this is going. So what you're saying is, Paul, look at the size of your big fat git. You used to fit under those really awkward cupboards in the stairs. Yes, I am a fat Harry Potter. Okay. I was that fat Harry Potter Sparky under the stairs who loved doing distribution boards, dressing in cables, making the jobs look lovely. Yes, I was.
I can't believe it.
It's like an EA, really. Electricians Anonymous. Hello, I'm Paul Meenan, and I'm an electrician. Is there a clinic for that? I don't know. Anyway, shall we crack on with this podcast?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
What's really difficult with the EICRs now, or the periodic inspection, is insurance companies and letting agents. And if you go and buy a house, they want a certificate before they buy it. And our industry should be doing more to educate people that these documents are by no means a certificate to certify that installation is safe the day they hand it to you, because the test could have been done a week ago, and within that week something could have happened. It's not certifying it at all.
Well, I've bought 2 houses in the last 2 years, not together, by the way. Bought one, refurb, sold it, horrible place, moved on, bought another. But when I was out doing a lot of house hunting, being dragged around, I would, of course, naturally, the spark in me, straight under the stairs, straight into the cupboard, and immediately I'd be like, I would make my decision. Am I buying it? Yes or no? No. If I didn't at least see a split RCD board, no, I wouldn't. And I remember walking to one house, and it was stunning, 4-bedroom, beautiful loft conversions, all that. And my missus went, "Oh, this is amazing. It's all hardwood floor." And I went, "Yeah, I'm not buying this." And the agent went, "Why not?" I said, "Needs a rewire." And he went, No, we've got a certificate." I went, "Look at that head." And the head was leaking pitch. It was cracked. The board was an old Wilex rewirable, and I said, "Mate, if I have to rewire this house, I have got to chase the walls and lift all this stunning flooring. Why in God's name did this moron put the floor down?
Yeah.
Given the age of that frigging wiring, how stupid! Electricians aren't bloody magicians. We can't magic electric invisible wires in, which every domestic installer will immediately go, but they fucking think we are." They think we're magicians. They think you can magic a cable from one side of the house without ripping up their brand new carpets from Carpet Right.
Can you just? That's the phrase.
Yeah. Can you just make them lights appear in my ceiling? Don't worry about all where the noggins are, whether you can get a straight line or any. Just can you just get it? Oh, why are you difficult? The bloke down the road can do it for 70 quid, and you want £400. Piss off.
It's ridiculous.
Get the guy for 70 quid to burn your goddamn house down.
Yeah.
It's a good thing on social media, actually. A lot of the lads are picking and choosing their clients. You look at the likes of Adrian Davey, Lee Ward, and all that. They're not afraid to put their workmanship online and say, "I'm expensive," or I'm not expensive. I am the price is the price because it's my time, my materials, but more importantly, my experience, skills, qualifications, and knowledge that I spent years gaining, as well as my insurances.
Yeah, there was a story about that once. I read somewhere where it says there was a big boiler factory, big metal container boilers, and one of the boilers broke down, and they spent thousands and thousands of pounds over a week to with their engineers trying to fix it. And they said we need a specialist, and they called a specialist from another country who flew over there, and it cost them about 35 grand to call him over. And he turned up with a little toffee hammer, and he hit at one part of the boiler, and the whole thing kicked in. And they said, well, we're not paying you 35 grand for that. He says, you're not paying me for my time, you're paying me for my experience. And that's always stuck with me, that, because it's true. He knew exactly where to hit on that engine or that boiler. And yeah, I remember just what you just reminded me of that story then. So it's an interesting one.
I have heard of that.
It's probably
quite
a different iteration of it, but
yeah, it's one of those business stories, isn't it?
yeah,
Sometimes
it is.
it's paying for that knowledge and experience. It's really weird. I worked at Shepherd's Bush, doing some survey work, 14 years ago probably, and then about 7 years later, I was project managing the station refurb. And of course, what did that mean? I knew every nook and cranny. I knew where all the catering was. I'd surveyed it all, and then I was in project managing it, so I could hit the ground running at a hell of a pace. And now, if they did work to Shepherd's Bush in the next 10 years, electrically, I know ins and outs of a duck's arse on that place. So I would know. It's
were
that knowledge.
when I worked for Leeds. I remember we were doing block refurbs. We were changing all the lights in a high-rise block, and I remember turning up with a chap called Jeff at the time. He still works there, I think, but he'd been there since time began. And we were walking around, and I said, I need to know where the cable run is. I need to know where all the cables are run through this high-rise building. And he says, oh yeah, I know. And he took me to this kind of containment. It wasn't really a containment, and he says it's in the wall here, behind here. And we did a little bit of investigation, and we found it all there. And unbeknown to me, I was super impressed at the fact that he knew where it was, and then it all came to fruition when he told me he was the one who wired it. So I found that fantastic. And yeah, you're right. If you know it, then you know it. But if you don't know it, you don't know it. And it's a very true statement.
So, getting back to what we're talking about, EICRs.
Yeah.
Should we give them a little interesting tidbit or a fact?
Go on.
So if we look through guidance note 3, the coding, you know where I'm going to go with this, don't you, Ryan? On the coding. So when you're doing an electrical installation condition report, you have 4 available codes to the inspector. You have a C1, you have a C2, a C3, and an FI. Now, page 104 of guidance note 3, table 3.5 defines them. And a C1 is danger present, risk of injury, immediate remedial action required. So anybody who finds a C1 there's a legal duty of care on them to close it out. Before you start arguing, yes, there is. Because if you walk away from a dangerous situation, you have guilty knowledge, you are culpable. If it's reasonable and practical to close that out, you have no defence under Regulation 29 of EAWR. Let's just close that out now. Okay? Right, because I know people will be moaning at the speaker that, no, C1, you've got to pay me. Come off it, lads. C2, potentially dangerous, urgent remedial action required. So that's where you could have a board that's catching fire. If it's catching fire, then you're going to have to switch it off, seek remedial works. It can vary what C2s are, but the C1s, I like the descriptor Richard Townsend uses. C1 is, I can touch it, I can see it, it'll kill me now. C2, it's got the potential to kill me at some point, and I know it eventually will happen.
Yeah.
C3 is improvement required in guidance note 3. Now, here's the first bit of controversy, because under 7671, that term C3 in the model forms, in the appendices, is improvement recommended.
Mm-hmm.
So, this error, so here we go, first controversial part of the podcast. The error is in the wiring regulations, the word is improvement recommended. In guidance note 3, it is improvement required. Which, if I was a client, oh no, hang on a minute, I am. and somebody says to me, I recommend improvement, I'll go, thank you very much. If somebody says to me, you are required to improve that infers something different from recommending. So this error has been in here since at least the 16th edition. It is one of those many, many mistakes that just leaps away from the wiring regs and all the supporting documents. So this is another example as to why we always say to people, please work from the regulations. It's not a Bible. It is not doctrine. You need to read it, understand it, and then work an engineering example or a logic or a safety case away from it. What's your thoughts on it, Ryan?
I'm just trying to find the mention in this document. So if you go to the front of if you've got a copy of it there, if you go to the front page of it, I think it's page 8, round about page 8
of Guidance Note 3.
Guidance Notes 3. It talks about note that it's a guidance, and in the second paragraph down it says it's in the preface. The second paragraph, it says, note that this guidance note does not ensure compliance with BS 7671. It is intended to explain some of the requirements of BS 7671, but readers should always consult BS 7671 to satisfy themselves of compliance.
Hang on a minute. So basically what that is that's an author's note that says, if I screw up, you can't hold me accountable. And yet
absolutely
every single tester who does inspection and testing work, not test and inspect, this is their Bible. GN3 is their doctrine, it's their Bible. And the third paragraph in the preface of GN8, if you've got the 18th edition version, which I have in front of me, I'm not that sad.
Guidance Note 3 means you're not talking about earthing and bonding.
Did I say 8?
You said 8, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Do you know why? It's because I was reading that earlier on. No, that is sad. It is a bit, sorry. So paragraph 3 of Guidance Note 3 does not ensure compliance. So that basically what that is telling you is, why'd you buy the book?
Yeah.
Why'd you buy the book? Because we're basically, we're not, if this is inaccurate, tough. It's not our problem, it's your problem. So thank you for buying my book for £35. And if it's got errors in, I don't care, because you need to follow the wiring regulations. When in actual fact, people need to be working away from the regulations. You know, this is an interesting one we covered. If people have watched, and I really hope they have on YouTube, our Future of the Wiring Regulations video, where we talk about various changes, and I'm a firm believer that from an inspection and testing perspective, there will have to be a new criteria for the inspector where they make observations of the installation while under its normal use. Because I think we're missing things now with this modern electronic technology, you know. So we go in, we're looking at an office block, say, and the sparks turn up at midnight. Everything gets, all the monitors are switched off, so they can't measure high protective conductor currents, which they know they've got. That the people may have nuisance tripping, which doesn't get through to the sparks. They can't measure whether some of that back EMF and noise is DC, because it'll all be switched off. So what they're doing is testing just the wiring, the fixed wiring. But the wiring may not, and the protection may no longer be suitable for the intended application under the wiring regs. And that is a massive bugbear of mine, because if you look at the external influences of when an installation is designed, Appendix 5 requires the designers to consider that, including the user. But the inspector isn't required to, because he's only looking at the wiring and protective devices. But yet we know, thanks to the 18th edition, that some devices are limited to 6 milliamp. So where is the kit? Here's a gun. Who in the manufacturing world is going to produce a device that will detect DC leakage in the system, or will inject it into the system to see whether or not that what the tolerance is on that RCD are? That's an interesting one for you.
It is. It is. Shall we jump back onto periodic inspections?
Yes, sorry, mate. Sorry, I went off on a little one of my little crusade rants.
It's the way to create more content. So the purpose of a periodic inspection: you're a client, I'm the contractor, and you ask me to come and do you a periodic inspection. Why? Without getting into the technical gumph of it all, why are you asking me to test one of your systems?
In all fairness, if I'm going to be honest, as a client, my mindset is going to be, I need to prove that my installations are safe for my staff or the people in it, because I might be the facilities manager, I might be the maintenance manager who knows there's this thing called an NIC certificate, because that's how dumb the way the industry works now. If it's an NIC certificate, that's the EICR, that's the assurance, and I need to just make sure I've done it every 3 or 5 years,
Yeah.
because that's what they've always done. For me, very simply, an EICR should be a ever fluctuating, continuous and ongoing process based on age and known risk.
Yeah.
But that's just because I know the book backwards.
Okay. So when we, let's just, I know your EICRs are 100, 200, 300 pages long. The majority of the people who are going to listen to this will, well, I wouldn't say majority, but quite a lot of them will be responsible for domestic EICRs. And let's, the purpose of the EICR, I've always found it really quite frustrating when people say, I'm going to do an EICR and I'm going to charge you this much for it and I'll deliver it to you on Friday. And I naturally would expect somebody to say to me, have you a copy of the previous test results?
Yeah.
Because from my perspective, if you carry ICR and you don't know what the results were before, unless, and there is an unless, there's always a clause in this, unless the EICR produces all of the known results, and I'll explain what known results are in a second, unless that EICR produces all known results, it's worth, all it is a snapshot on that date. It's nothing of benefit really. Now, known results is if you're going to bang 500 through your insulation resistance and you're going to get greater than 999, that's a known result because there's no deterioration on that circuit. But as soon as that circuit starts showing signs of deterioration, it is essential that you can see what the previous result was. Because say I have a property and it goes into void, for instance, in social housing, and somebody tests it 6 months ago or a week ago, for instance, and when they tested it a week ago, they got greater than 500 megohms or greater than 999 or whatever. And then they moved out within a week and another Sparky goes in and carries out that same test and gets 20 megohms. In a 1 week period, that's dropped by 480 megohms, but yet it's still over the 1 megohm in BS7671. And that electrician will give it 5 years till its next inspection, when the client has seen a deterioration over a week of over 408. So the client knows that they're going to be left with risk for way over 4 years. Whereas, is the Sparky doing anything wrong there? So it's, if you don't have the previous test results, I think the document is almost, it's not worthless because it still gives you a snapshot. But if any of the results that the Sparky gets is not as intended or not as known, you've got a big problem if you don't have the previous ones.
I think the EICR documents have always been a bone of contention and a point of much argument and disorder in the industry. I've seen loads and loads of electrical installation certificates. I've had them handed to me as a client, and within 30 seconds I've rejected them. I once had one that had 8 errors on the front page. 8 on the front page. Now, I hadn't instructed the work because I would have, let's put it this, if I instruct an EICR, I will be sitting you down and telling you straight, I want all my results typed out on a computer, because I want the person to be thinking about them again, not just once, thinking about them again, so that the form is accurately recorded. So I don't accept handwritten certificates for one. And I didn't when I was at EDF and I created schedules where we used Microsoft Word and Excel. Everything was typed so the guy could consider and validate and verify in his own brain. With the EICRs, I think people follow doctrine in Guidance Note 3 too much. I mean, I used to say to people, why do you do 3 years? Or why do you do 5 years? And they'll go, oh, well, the chart in the Guidance Note 3 says commercial every 3 or 5 years. And that's it. And they switch off. And people don't realise, including the inspectors, that they are that competent authority when they're doing the inspection and test. It's their view, their judgment. I had an EICR given to me, and I'm not going to lie, I had an EICR given to me and it had failed, and it was for a railway station, and it said recommended frequency of next inspection 5 years. And what the fuck? Why would you recommend 5 years if it's failed? I mean, what sort of nincompoop recommends 5 years if it's failed? You know, if I was the inspector and it had failed, based on the level of risk, I would have said 12 months, 24 months, or at, you know, 1 year after completion of attached defect sheet. That to me is a competent inspector. They're not around anymore. There is a mass culture of just churning out the numbers. You and I both know there are companies out there, and I'll give you an example of one. I went when I was doubling up in my youth, which I've mentioned on other podcasts. I went into one company for an interview, and the guy showed me around, and he opened this door, and there was about 40 ladies sat in front of computers in an open plan office typing away. And I went, wow, what do they do? And he said, they type out the EICR certificates. And I was like, really? And he went, yeah, that's all they do. They just type out the EICRs. They know more than our NICQS.
Oh.
I was like, you're joking. And he was like, no. And so I said, so what do you want me to do? And he said, well, you go out, do these retail places, and all you got to do is just basically find where the board is, go to the furthest circuit, get a ZS on a socket and a lighting circuit, and basically we'll do the rest. You know, close the breakers, do some IRs against live and neutral combined. That's it. Show your face, get out, put those results in. The ladies will do the rest because it's allowed.
Wow.
And that was the trouble. There's so much debate over this calculation, all the rest of it. Do you know what I say? Bollocks. I don't agree with calculating. If you're going to do an EICR, the first thing, the most important thing is the person ordering the work understands the extent and limitations.
Yeah.
If you do not understand the extent and limitations, you're screwed. I have always said to people, when I've ordered an EICR, you will, and this on the railway, you will shut off the supplies to my comms equipment. You will R1 and R2 it. You will prove I've got continuity. You will installation resistance test it. I have had to spell out. You will do 100% of all tests necessary because I don't have old data. And I need to understand a real time, a realistic confirmation of polarity and safety of the installation resistance. That's what I need. And it's amazing the look on the face of the Sparks who are so used to cutting corners or not doing it properly. It's mind blowing. And that's a big problem in our industry.
That is a big problem. And here's another big problem. Let me ask you a question. Did you know? Always makes me laugh, that statement.
Did you know?
Did you know
hello, Andy?
that there is? Yeah, hi Andy. Did you know that there is no document publication that tells you a frequency of periodic electrical inspection other than the Housing Act, which refers to HMOs, and very recently there has been an agreement or publication of secondary legislation for rented accommodation being electrically safety checked every 5 years.
Oh, for fuck's! Do you know what the worst thing is? I walked into my current workplace where I am, and I was told your EICR regime is just finishing, and I was like, great. And they went, yeah, it's a 5-yearly one done by blank company. So I just immediately rolled my eyeballs and I thought, 5-yearly? Oh, okay. This is going to be interesting. 5-yearly. The underground and most railways every 3 years. Yeah, so if you go to OUL, it's every 3 years. DLR, it's constant. The Docklands Light Railway employ 4 inspection and test engineers full time to constantly, because once they start one station, it takes them 3 years to get through the whole route. And then they're starting again. So they are 24/7 paperwork, and they have the original records going back all the way to the very start of the railway. So that's really, really good. But immediately when I started getting the reports back, I was like, well, that frequency needs to change. Now here's the problem. And this is why you get bad clients. If I turn around and I'm the contractor and say, I'm really sorry, but your installation has failed, I recommend it every 12 months. A client doesn't forecast that in his cost models.
Yeah.
So, for me, I can't turn around to my bosses and say, we've priced for electrical installation condition report every 5 years. It's going to have to be every year. They haven't budgeted as a business for that. However, if that's what's needed, guess what? That's what's going to get done. And that's at the moment where your face has gone.
I've gone.
Yeah, you've
still
gone.
Here.
You still see me.
Yeah, you're still
Okay,
there.
that's fine. Your face has disappeared. Doesn't matter anyway.
So people, they need to know that on a podcast we can actually see each other. So yeah, we can see each other,
Well, that's weird.
or
You've
at least
appeared back.
I can see Paul now.
Yeah, you've appeared back now.
Yeah, so it is interesting in terms of the frequency, because I get asked a lot, what's the frequency of inspection? And like you see, it is constant. For DLR, it was constant. And if you go to Guidance Notes 3, everybody gets wrapped up on section 3.2. It's probably, I don't know, around about page 80 something, 83 or something. So there's a table in the in Guidance Notes 3 which talks about the frequency of electrical inspection, but it doesn't talk about periodic inspection. It talks about the initial frequency of inspection. So when you consider that table and you say to somebody, what's the frequency? What frequency are you using? They say, well, I'm going by the table 3.2, which tells me that it's 5 years for rented property. However, if you've got that document in front of you, how many electricians have looked at the column to the right of where it says 5 years? There's another column on that table.
Yeah, it says notes.
No. Just before that, it says visually inspected. On the table where it says at the top, it says rented accommodation. Let me get my document out and I'll find it.
Table 3.2 we're talking about here.
Yeah, table 3.2. It says domestic rented domestic, and it says 5 year frequency, and then it says recommended 1 year visually inspection.
No, it says routine check now.
Routine check. Okay, visually routine.
Yeah. Sneaky
okay,
rewording.
Well, I didn't have that document to hand, so that's gone from my memory. So people will just have to forgive me for that. So,
that's all right. That's just what we're about.
So we have people preaching 5 years.
Yep.
Why aren't people preaching a routine check every 1 year?
They're not. They're assuming it's done.
And I'll tell you why. Because that 5 years is from the date of installation. The 5 years is a recommended frequency. So if you go above the table to the page above it, there'll be some comments in there. And one of the regulations, which back in the 16th, or it was regulation 622, where I said it determines the time interval between the next inspection or periodic inspection. It actually refers to the inspector taking into account kind of the age of the installation, how it's used. Is it just a standard installation that's not overused? Is it a high risk installation?
I'll interject there. So section 3.7 in Guidance Note 3 infers to regulation 6521 in advising a duty holder about the time interval for period of the next recommended inspection and test. The inspector is required to take into consideration the individual characteristics, the type of the installation, equipment, its condition, use, operation, damage and deterioration. Now, I'm sorry to say this, but a lot of Sparks don't. They don't. You just go there to bell out, mega, get a ZS, and somebody else does it. That is an
5 years
breach, and it's a folly. The results and recommendations of previous should be considered. Now, in a lot of places, they don't happen because companies are really crap. It also mentions the words competent inspector, because if you remember in the regulations, there's a note that says that the inspection testing should be done by competent persons. It's the only reference to it, but also it says, where is it? In short, the inspector being a skilled person, so he's gone from competent to skilled in one little area, should apply sound engineering judgment and experience when deciding upon intervals between inspecting and testing an installation based on the criteria in regulation 652. It must also be noted, in the event of an accident or dangerous occurrence, the inspector may be required to justify your decision. So if you're knocking out hooky EICRs and there is a dangerous occurrence or an event or an accident and your name is on that certificate, that is where you are going to be summoned, pulled up, and asked to justify it. You cannot turn around and say that was what the contractual frequency was, because there's enough in this document to hang you out to dry.
There really is. So let's look at another part of the regulations, and this time we'll look at the BS 7671. And another thing that kind of pips the post when we talk about people is we've talked about competence in the electrical industry quite a lot, and we talk about apprentices coming through and people coming through the colleges now and being competent, or passing exams is not necessarily competent, but they're passing exams, and they're passing exams on the requirements of electrical installations today. However, when you go into some properties, there will be VIR cables, there will be BEMCO units they've never seen, there'll be sockets on the skirting boards, there'll be things that they've never seen. There'll be 1 mil earths on the twin and earth for the 2.5 for the ring mains. And these people who have trained now will look at that and think, this must be really old, I'm going to fail the installation, it needs a rewire. However, if you go to page 13 of BS 7671, there's a note from the Health and Safety Executive, and it's pretty clear. Existing installations may have been designed and installed to conform to the standards set by earlier editions of the BS 7671 or the IEE wiring regulations. This does not mean that they will fail to achieve conformity with the relevant parts of the Electricity at Work Regulations 1989. Now remember, the Electricity at Work Regulations was published in 1989. I think it was actually 1990, April 1990, but who's counting? That document has never been updated. So any installation going back to then should still conform, should still be satisfactory.
So just on a side note, that little note by the Health and Safety Executive technically is a breach of BS 0. Being a really sad anal person, but if you look in BS 0, you are not allowed to infer that compliance with British standard would mean compliance with statutory law. That note, here's a bombshell for this podcast, that note should not be in the wiring regulations. And on the 18th edition DPC, I made the comment that it should be removed. I've also made the comment to the British Standards Institute that they are in breach of their own rules for standards. BS 0 is free to download. Have a read for it yourself. It's in the document. You cannot infer compliance with British standard, compliance with statutory law. It's a dangerous game.
Yeah, so BS 0, for those who don't know, British Standard 0 is the standard that committees who sit like JPEL 64, who write our wiring regulations, this is it's like the Bible of what you are and aren't allowed to do. And so they've written their own set of guidelines on the things that they are not allowed to do. And as Paul's just said there, I wasn't aware of that. I think you might have mentioned it before, but
I've not mentioned it in a podcast, but I have mentioned it in many a rambling about BS 0 and it being breached. If you remember when the wiring regs was first out for draft public comment, you could go on Twitter and find out what was going on. People were so excited, or go to a trade show and have a leaflet handed to you saying that they were already compliant with Amendment 1. Let's not muck around. There was remember there was test equipment manufacturers hocking their wares.
That's right.
Saying it was compliant with Amendment 1, and when we asked them how it had complied, they were saying, "Oh, we got a preview copy from the blank organisation," and which again is slightly a breach of the terms of sitting on that JPEL committee. Although, if we were going to just slightly diverge, sitting on a JPEL committee, which should be a privilege, I personally think all of those meetings should be publicly broadcast. And held on public record, so that the industry and the general public should see the decisions that are being made for their safety.
Will never ever happen.
That would be a step forward to the future.
I would like it to, but it'll never.
Well, let's
happen.
put it like this: one day, if there was a massive tragedy, it fucking soon would, involving electricity, because the industry would kick the industry bodies so hard in the bollocks they wouldn't have a choice. Can you imagine if there was a horrific incident involving electricity, the amount of people that would be writing to MPs, government, industry bodies, and you'd soon see a mass shift. Oh, not us, governor. Just remember, this industry's in the state it's in because of industry bodies, poorly written books, the people that have come from the 1970s, it's not in a great place, and the regulations change. Let's not beat up on the regulations. They're always going to change. Technology is always going to change, and we have to develop and improve our skills. But if you look at the wiring regs currently, Chapter 64 is initial verification. Okay, so if you go through initial verification, it's got lots of rules of what to do and how to test, and then it goes straight into Chapter 65, periodic inspection and testing. My personal view is Chapter 65 should become Chapter 66. There should be a new Chapter 65 that is called verification in situ, where the inspector will go and look at the intended use of the electrical installation, which kind of would then take you back to, is it fit for continued use? Because that's one of the reasons why we do this, isn't it? Fit for continued use. And if you look at Appendix 5, the external influences, the main things that we learn in college is environmental influences. But if you get a code B, it's a utilization code for exposure to children, skilled, instructed, resistance, evacuation, contact with earth, materials, contamination risk. Could the electrical installation be contaminated given an AM7 code? Do we check for it? Do we inspect for it? No, we don't. So all of my biggest concern, again, if you've listened to the RCD podcast, is we're doing all this good work to do some great electrical installations, and yet they may not potentially be safe while in their normal operation. And we're not inspecting and testing for that. All we're doing is testing those little bits of copper, and then that circuit breaker works with nothing really plugged into it, so we won't really know how it's been affected.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's another bombshell for this one. I would campaign for
is a bombshell.
A new chapter in BS 7671 for fundamental checks for the verification of devices and inspection whilst in situ. So by that, if you aren't wondering what, measurement of protective conductor currents, DC influence on the system, functionality of a low risk breaker, so that you can say it's been proved, i.e. like a cleaner socket or something like that. Okay. All these little things would be a great thing to give confidence to the end report before you go out and do a nighttime shutdown. Presence of bonding. You need to do that before you start mucking around with an installation. So why isn't that in there? Because you can't tell me a lot of inspectors will go to a shutdown in an office block. They're not going to spend 2 hours running around finding the bonding before they shut it down. They're going to get in and shut it down. So all that sort of stuff should be maybe defined.
Yeah, you're completely right. Yeah, you are completely right. It's it almost feels like they just miss things out, and I don't know why. Why would they not specify that? Why would the regulations and why would the guidance not specify that?
They would argue that Regulation 643.8, the verification of the effectiveness of the measures applied for additional protection is fulfilled by visual inspection and testing. Where RCDs are required for additional protection, where they're required, well, they're frigging everywhere pretty much now. The effectiveness of automatic disconnection supply shall be verified using test equipment. Great. But what it would be nice to say is during normal operation, this should be validated. I would add a note, even in the notes, because it says effectiveness is deemed to be verified where an RCD meets the requirements of and a disconnect within 40 milliseconds. Well, let disconnect in 40 milliseconds when you've got 26 computers connected to it, all leaking. Who knows? Who knows?
No, yeah, absolutely.
And I genuinely thinking, I'll be honest with you, I'm going to predict something now. The day I come to retire at age 79, the Wiring Regulations 20th edition or 21st will come out, and there'll be a line, and I'll be able to go back to my podcast. I said it 20 odd years ago. Huzzah! But it does take ages.
Paul likes to do impressions.
I think it's
that one at Lex was fantastic.
What one? Oh, the German.
The German one. Jeez, I've never laughed so much.
It was a funny. We uploaded it to YouTube, but the audio was so poor we've kept it private because it's more for our own giggles really, and then we recorded a new one with Dave.
Yeah,
but
good.
Yeah, the German guys at Eton were fantastic. They really were absolutely fantastic. But yeah, that's what happened to me. You did drama in school.
Let's have a quick run through of the importance of the circuit results on a EICR before we finish this podcast.
Ooh, okay.
So, for me, I'm a little bit of a stickler. So, if we start from the left, we have circuit designation. We specify what the circuit is, and we've seen tons of different words from there, and that needs to be written in a way that somebody can understand it. So sockets, for instance, is either sockets, it's either SKTS, it's either the amount of things I've seen in there where you look at it and think, I don't know what that is. I don't know what it is. It doesn't make any sense to me. The type of wiring is something that I find really interesting, and I can't really give statistics out, but I would love to. And maybe one day I will take kind of general statistics from my company and advertise them out there to let people benefit from them. But just to give you a little bit of an insight, when you look at the type of wiring and you go to an installation, there are particular people right across the country who will put type of wiring A, reference method C, and on every single document that they ever publish, every single document that they ever fill in, it's cable type A, reference method C. Now, I'd urge people to go into the regs, into appendix, is it 14? I'm not entirely sure. We should look that up before we finish this podcast.
The schedule of test results is in appendix 7.
No, not the
6, sorry,
test
6.
results. The reference methods, when you've got all the different types of reference methods, they're just before the current carrying capacities at the back of the regs. So I would urge people to kind of understand the different reference methods. Table A4A2, table 4A2. That's installation methods. Schedule of installation methods of cables. It's on page 386. Understand them so that when you go into an installation, you can actually write down the true information. Just for an example, if you've got an installation where it's a bungalow and all the cables are underneath 100 millimeters, 150 mil of insulation, and you put cable type, if you see cable type A and its reference method C, for the asset manager or for the client, they're going to look at that down the line and they're going to do a little bit of an assessment, and they're going to say, right, where are my high risk properties? I want to invest in bringing some of my installations and making them safer. I tell you what, find where all of my installations are that have cables that are buried under insulation. There's never been a fire of a cable under insulation ever, but let's just say there was. Because you don't fill in the cable type and the reference method correctly, that individual is never going to be able to find that because it's noted wrong on the EICR. But because you will never know unless you go and physically check the installation, you have to have trust in that Sparky to know what they're doing. So we're only on the third column on the schedule of test results, and we can already see that how important these are to people who will have to manage that installation for a long period of time. Number of points served, that's also a really important thing to put in there, because for within housing, what people don't realise is you have what's called the Decent Home Standard, which was out for quite some time, and it's being republished in April next year, which has been termed as fit for human habitation. And that'll define the amount of sockets that can be in a particular property, the amount of heating that needs to be in there. And if you've got an installation where it says it's a bungalow and it's got a socket circuit and it's got 2 sockets on it, that's a non-decent installation that the client can benefit from. So the 4th column along, it's important information. What we've got next is cable type, so the cable size. So 6 mil, 10 mil, 2.5, 1.5. And then after that, you've got disconnection time. The thing that I find interesting about disconnection time, and I don't know if you know this, Paul, but if you go to BS 7671 and the model forms, disconnection time isn't in the model forms.
I was going to say, what certificate are you reading? Because I'm looking at the model forms now, and I can't see it.
Yeah, disconnection time has never been in there.
So is it worth noting to people that the trouble is again, the best certificates always were the NIC ones, because the NIC ones openly stated that they were an enhancement on the minimum in the regulations. This is the minimum in the generic schedule of test results. When I worked at EDF, I developed my own versions of them where I basically, because we used like FP400, so I gave FP400 an installation code. So on the London Underground, they have all different terms because it's now in the standard, where we worked from the regulations, not to the regulations. I've never, ever, ever liked the schedule of test results because it's never given us enough information. I mean, schedule of circuit details, schedule of test results. So what if I have a UPS fed installation? Now I'm going to hear loads of people going, just put the highest value. How many people do ZS testing while a UPS is on discharge? You still got to guarantee the safety of that circuit while it's on discharge. And also, another bombshell, will the inverter of the UPS deliver sufficient fault current to trip the breaker under a fault? Now, some blokes will be going, don't be stupid, mate, it's UPS, there for safety. It doesn't matter if you're connected on the end of it. Persons, then property. Yeah, that's the way it goes in the regs. Persons first, then property. If you've got UPS backed circuits, they still need to comply. So I did London Underground stations where we had like 6 or 7 UPSs feeding various changeover switches, static switches, and the circuit details was the cover sheet. Then I'd have like 7 or 8 circuit detail because I had to prove to the client that I had independently verified each supply characteristic meant it was safe for use at the point of energization when it was new.
You're completely right. The water industry, like Thames Valley Water, Northern Ireland Water and stuff, their EICRs are completely different just because of the things that they have to test and the way that they have to test. And it's, for the purpose of this one, we're running through the model forms in BS 7671, which is where we have to start. But it's a very, very valid point. If you work in an industry that needs, for instance, at Alex, Phil Watts, Sparky Ninja's old man, he said, why isn't there a column on, or why don't we test? I mean, there is a column there. It says RN, neutral, testing. Why don't we test the continuity of neutrals on every circuit?
And my response to him was, well, I do. But then again, I was taught when I did my 2391 that you were going to validate continuity on every single point of connection. Do it properly, do it thoroughly. And the thing is the reason why you do that, and I think this is becoming a lost thing, a really good tester, once they get into an installation, will get the knack of knowing what the real impedance, sorry, not the impedance, the resistance of those cables are. So when he's going along and doing his little R1, if it's on a ring main, little R1, little N, little R2s, straight away he'll know where that loose connection is. If it's a radial, it's the same principle. He should be getting, if it's a 2.5mm radial and he's getting 0.14 end to end, 0.16 end to end, 0.14 end to end, he knows he's got some loose connections on his neutral. It should be bang on the same. And if the inspector's validating polarity, he can go along and he can tighten up all those connections as he's going along. Because that's what you do as you're inspecting and testing, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
But most people don't.
No, it's all down to time now, isn't it?
Well, I worked for one boss. I worked for one guy. I was an agency spark. I pray to God he isn't listening to this. He basically turned around to me and said I was testing too slowly. I didn't give a crap. And he said, oh, you need to do it really quick. So we went into the kitchen in the office and he basically took part the 3-phase board and he said, right, now do a full test on that ring final, which went around the office. So I was like, fine, could you show me how you want me to do it? What are your expectations? He was a bully. And he went through it and he did it and he banged it out super quick. So I went, okay, fine. Can you just stay there and make some tea? And he went, yeah. So I went away with my screwdriver. I had a play. I came back and said, could you do it again? And he went, fuck off, don't be stupid. But I went, please, just do it again. So he did it. At that time, the managing director came out. He walked into the room and he watched it. And I said, please show me how you want me to test. So he did the exact same test again. I went, brilliant. And he went, there, will you do it like that? I went, no. And he went, why not? I said, because you've missed the fact that neutral earth are reversed. He went, pardon? I said, no, come out with me. So I showed him how I was doing it. And I opened up the sockets and I went, oh, look, neutral and earth are reversed. You didn't pick that up, did you? I went, oh, it was reversed twice. So he never would have picked it up without the visual inspection. And that's why I said to him, visual inspection first. You have to confirm polarity. I'm not putting you in prison. I'm not putting the MD in prison. The MD saw this and was like, okay, well, that bloke didn't last the end of the week.
Wow.
And I worked for him because the MD realised this guy was putting him at risk. He was a conscientious director. He didn't realise what was going on underneath him. You know, you pay people for results, but you don't pay people to cut corners. And
no, I agree with that.
Sparks who work for those sorts of companies, I've met guys in CAFs who've gone, oh yeah, mate, I'll do 4 periodics a day. Really?
Not for me, you won't.
Yeah, please don't.
Not for me.
I just think
So,
education.
rifle across the rest of these. So we've got our breakers types, we've got BSENs, we've got breaker types. So you will, when we put the arc fault detection devices on, are we going to be writing the BS? Are we still going to be putting 61009 in, for instance? Or when they replace it, what's that going to? Is that the 62? Oh,
Yeah,
what is it
that's
now?
a good one. How dare you? BSEN 62606. It should roll off the tongue, Dempsey. See, now what you're doing is you're
And the
showing how
non-technical
little research you have done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I get it.
Whilst
I
the
get it.
nerds of us have got it tattooed onto our brain cells. So if you are testing an AFDD circuit, it's a very interesting point, Mr. Dempsey, because the AFDDs available in the UK are to BSEN 62606, but that does raise the question, because you can get arc fault detection devices without RCBO protection. So if I was the conscientious tester, I would put type BSEN 61009/62606.
Okay.
That's how I would approach it for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Until we're 100% confirmed that everybody's single modules are all RCBO and arc fault, which is where they should be.
That's a good point. It's a good point.
So there's
so we've then got the type.
tip.
Yeah, we've then got the type, which is important, dependent on not so important on domestic. However, if you were to take your fault current, your ZS, simple Ohm's law calculation to get your fault current, you could balance that against your short circuit capacity of the breaker and have a look at that. That would be, I used to do that, but in a domestic setting, you're never going to get anywhere near that. For a commercial setting, you potentially will. One of the interesting things that I've noticed recently, especially with the 18th edition, is people are noting the 1 times on EICRs rather than the 5 times on the RCDs. However, if you on the schedule of test results where you've got RCD operating current, if that says 30 milliamps in there, then it's additional protection. Therefore, guidance notes 3 and automatic disconnection of supply says that you have to do it times 5. So you should be expected to see the times 5 value in the RCD operating time, because remember they've shifted. We used to have 2 in there. We used to have times 1 and times 5, and obviously they're too lazy to shift that column across. So what they've done is they've just dropped one of them to make room for the arc fault detection.
Do you think? Yeah, I think it's evident they've dropped it to. I mean, we knew that before the wiring rigs came out, because I think that got put on Twitter, on Facebook by one of the guys in the committee, which was just dumb. I mean, how dumb can you get? But the AFDD one, yeah, it's quite interesting. I don't understand why the IET haven't, because based on what we were talking about in our podcast about the future of wiring, these schedules of test results are going to have to change massively. And do you know what? I think it's a case of somebody one day is going to come out with a new model form, and Sparks are going to love it. I mean, look at Electroform. You give him a test result schedule, he'll make it electronically and give you the option. I sent him my work from London Underground, where we did a lot of 110 volt double pole. So if you're working on industrial and you have 110 volt circuits, Electroform are the only company with digital versions of those forms. I think these are going to have to change massively, and I think this just comes down to possible sheer laziness or not wanting to deviate from the Senelec standards, because maybe because where we change stuff, we put a 200 number behind the regulation. Are we even allowed to deviate that much? Is this a Senelec harmonization thing, which is why the NIC have said, sod it, we don't have to comply and we'll just make better certificates? It's true though.
Yeah, it
the
is
NIC ones are totally different, and when you look at them, I look at the NIC certificates as the minimum information I would require. But yet the IET put out generic schedules, which are, to be perfectly frank, no use to anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, they may be for a learner. If you're doing testing in a bay, your first attempt to do it, this is probably about as much information as you'd want. But when you're doing a competent inspection and test, they're not suitable nor sufficient. Again, I keep using terms that will be used against you in a court of law. Have you taken reasonable steps? Was this suitable and sufficient?
I think you're right. I think people should start to consider Electroform. I see quite a lot of good press for them. I think you're right. I think people should start looking at creating their own, and I don't think there should be a standard document. I think each organisation or each sector should have their own to capture the data that they need to meet
you know what?
Regulation 4 of
Do you know what?
electricity work regs.
I should create one for rail, like a one for national rail, where we can cover the LV bonding, the traction bonding, so there's
Yeah, you
separate
should. Yeah, you
validation
should.
of it.
You should.
Because there are definitely quirks. And again, the wiring regs is the minimum. Doesn't really cover a lot on railways, although all the stations are covered and all the platform furniture is covered.
You see, Paul, we're part of a pretty good committee that you're the governor of, and that would be a perfect place to have that conversation about multiple forms. So,
Are you saying we should set up our own committee called EPEL,
of course
E5PEL, or
not.
something like that?
How dare you?
Do you know what? Do you know what? Next time the DPC comes out, not Amendment 1 because there's nothing really in it, but next time the 19th edition comes out, let's set up our own public committee where we review the DPC and we do loads of videos and podcasts where we talk about it and get people to engage, and then we can then write on behalf of the industry tons of feedback. So even if it's someone texting us or something like that, where they can go, I don't agree with that, and we can then start getting to the grassroots of why. But then we can say unofficially EPEL or E5PEL will give feedback to the Wiring Regs Committee in an informal manner.
Yeah.
It'll probably annoy the hell out of them, but so tough. You're on these committees, you are public, as far as I'm concerned, if you're on the JPEL committee, you're a public servant. You're serving the industry and the electricians in it. Where was I? Sorry, we had a technical glitch there, which you won't have noticed because we'll have edited it out. Yeah, so I think it's a good thing that we should maybe do our own unofficial committee. One thing that came out in the regulations was there was an additional need in regulation, I think it's 6415, where when altering or making an alteration or addition, it shall be verified that the alteration complies with the regulation and does not impair the safety. And I found that a fascinating reg because that links to the 13216 regulation about alterations and additions. So the one thing I found was the wiring regs for the first time ever in the 18th edition, which is a celebratory thing, has now bookended itself. So 13216, no alteration addition, so you don't, until you verify and ascertain that it's not going to harm the installation. And at the end, in the inspection and testing, you have to verify that you haven't impaired safety of the installation. How many people have done that? How do you measure that? Where does it go?
I don't know.
So I think the journey of inspection and testing is only going to grow. I think the debate will be great as long as it's healthy and not people getting bogged down on this boy does, measures and calcs and all the rest of it. For me, go and test correctly, do the right thing, be principled. Remember what we said about the notes in guidance note 3. You can be held accountable. People don't realize when you leave an employer, you are still going to be held accountable for the decisions that you made in that employ. Self-employed guys think they can get away with it, I think, a little bit more. They're a bit more lackluster. When somebody said to me the other day, were you happy with the decisions you made at the DLR? And it was an interesting debate because I said to him, absolutely, I can stand by every decision I've ever made going back for at least the last 10 years, that it was the right thing, it was the right principle, moral standards, legislation, the lot. But it's amazing how many people possibly may not be able to do that. So there's a long way to go. Right,
People
any final
don't think
thoughts?
of that. People don't think of that at all. They don't consider once the job's done, that's it. Why would they feel that that's going to impact them when they're working somewhere else and life's tickety boo? So
have you ever thought that maybe this is the reason why records are never available? How many times have you heard stories? I have. When I went into an installation and said, do you have any records? And they went, the last sparks burnt it all in an oil barrel out the back. I know I have. I went to one job where they had an oil barrel where they just burnt all the drawings, all the records, all the test certs, maybe to cover up their sins or maybe because they were just pissed off. I don't know. But asking for records, otherwise you're proceeding with caution with an enhanced initial verification is the way forward. You're checking the bonding first. If you're not checking the bonding, then you're not doing it properly. So we've had a few technical glitches, I think it's fair to say. So we're going to probably end this because I think we're chipping on. I think the point is we can debate periodic inspection and testing. We need to make the inspectors aware far greater that they are responsible and liable after the event. Going forward, many years, when you sign that bit of paper, it's not about the extra pound an hour or extra couple of hours a shift. You are liable. So you need to make sure you stick with your principles. And also a bit of advice, redo, because in the next few years, are going to redo my 2391. I need to, because my confidence on it has slipped. And I think you need to consistently keep chipping away, because me and you are not inspectors anymore. We know it, we've done it, we've lived it, we breathe it. You as a business live and breathe it, but it's still worthwhile getting.
It's only a multiple choice now.
Seriously,
it's a multiple choice now. When I did it, it was the original in 2007 when it closed book and Thursday afternoon between 6 and 9, and now it's a multiple choice. 2 stupid answers,
I'm
1
still gonna
stupid
do it.
answer.
I'm still going to do it, but
Yeah, you should.
yeah, I mean, it was the one course I've been on where the tutor's passion inspired me to be much better than I thought I could, and he unlocked lots of knowledge in my brain and fed me lots of knowledge.
I
In
can
all
still
fairness,
remember the name of mine.
Hey,
I still remember the name of the chap who taught me my 2391.
yeah, mine was Graham Moulds.
Bob Walker, he was called.
Bob Walker, don't know him.
No.
My guy was David. I look at Dave Watts as similar to Graham Moulds, in fairness, just that genius level of application of the regs, really. But anyway, right, so we could go on for ages. I think the main thing for us to remind you guys of is to be safe out there, to make sure you read your guidance note 3 as regular CPD, that you're aware of decisions you make as an inspector, that you can define the next frequency regardless of what the contract is. So if you've got a client who's being an arsehole and you believe in your opinion that it's got to be inspected again in the next 18 months, put it on the form. They can't legally stop you. What it does mean to do is they will have to rebalance and relook at their finances to ensure an enhanced frequency of maintenance or something, some reasonable step is being undertaken. That's not down to you and you cannot be blamed for it. If they sack you for it, you can take to court and pay off half your mortgage, because all you're doing is your due diligence. So yeah, any final thoughts, Mr. Dempsey?
Yeah, just these are really important documents, and they have a lot of really important numbers in them that mean a lot to the person you're handing the document to. Not in every case. Sometimes the client won't fully understand the numbers. They'll be totally relying on you. But in some cases, you'll be sending this document to a client who fully understands that 0.26 ohms on an R1, R2 for a 10 mil cable is 48 meters long. So just be mindful that when you pass this document to the client, that they need the information, and not just it's a satisfactory and it's got a C1 or it's had a C1 rectified and the next inspection date. There's a lot more useful information in those documents that you produce.
It's also worth noting as well, a lot of sparks will go in and they'll just be doing ZSs because the client won't allow stuff to be shut down. Well, that might be fine, but as an inspector, you need to note that in your scheduled departures very clearly, that the client agreed and where that agreement is, to protect yourself. Because I had guys who would turn up on my railway and say, I can't switch that off. And I'm like, well, yes, you can. All you got to do is plan it. Give me a plan and we will shut down the whole station. And we'll shut it down during the day for an hour so that you can work safely. And they're stunned. They're like, oh, really? Yeah, plan. The first thing you have to do in any electrical safety management system is plan your outages, your shutdowns, and it's the exact same for periodic inspection and test. If I need my wiring tested, I need to understand and take on the liability of shutdowns. Now, a lot of office blocks, it's during the night time. On the railway, I prefer it during the day, because after the peak, which is about 9:30, 10 o'clock, you can shut the power off, and if anything goes wrong, you can have every man and his dog there to get power restored before the next peak. It's far better than not opening a railway station for the rush hour in the morning. So it might be worthwhile people thinking about their outage times and what's best and what the best mitigation is for the client. But anyway, I think that's us. I think we've rambled enough.
That is us.
Final thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think we've just covered them. It's just be mindful, accountability, cover your own arse, which is really important. But kind of just ensure that you understand the readings that you're putting on the document. Don't just write it from a piece of testing equipment. If you don't understand it, you shouldn't be doing it.
I think as a final thought as well, I think it's fair to say that given the way the world is going and the nature of fires now and accountability and the fact that industries haven't caught up, I think it's fair to say that a lot of insurance companies will eventually start knocking on doors. It's only a matter of time for the insurance companies start.
Well, I can tell you that
doors.
that's happening now.
Yeah, I know. And they're going to be knocking on doors, and there will eventually be they'll have systems and processes smarter than the Sparks are. Potentially, they'll have engineers who used to do it, checking stuff. There'll be nowhere to hide for this stuff in 20, 30 years' time,
Yeah.
and we've got to get better at it. But on that bombshell, we're going to end it. Thank you very
Okay.
much for listening to our ramblings, Ryan. Awesome.
Yeah.
And until the next one, whomever I may be with as a group or as an individual, thank you very much for listening. Take care of yourself and each other.